Hello, welcome back to part 2 of the engine rebuild video for my Mark 1. I'm going to hand you over now to Lee. The line has arrived finally and we can crack on with the rest of the rebuild and the blueprinting of the YB motor. Also, I've had quite a few questions about how much it all costs, and Lee's done a piece at the end of the video about all the individual costs and the work that goes into rebuilding a motor properly. I'll hand over to Lee.
Good news is today, the Cosworth over there for Lee. This is the one that we've had to order a special liner. Unfortunately, guys, it's turned up today, which is good. So I'm just about to press this liner in, and fingers crossed my measurements have been correct, because if they're not, we're in trouble. But yeah, this has turned up probably about 2 weeks quicker than they said, which is fantastic, because as soon as Paul has finished that Cosworth, I'm going to get him on that one. Everything's pretty much ready to go on this. We've obviously got to still do some work on the head, but the pistons have got the cutouts. The crank's all ground and balanced, etc. So clutch is all balanced. So yeah, as soon as I've finished the block, which hopefully will be Monday, or it might even be tomorrow, get Paul on that one. So good news. So I've smeared my 620 locking compound in the bore there, and this is going to be the moment of truth, guys. Well, one good thing, it doesn't fall down the bore, which I suppose is good news. Always a bit nerve-wracking doing this. So what I normally do is just start to press the liner in. Just so it sort of centres itself, goes in about 10 mil, because otherwise you are relying on the bed, which is always a bit wibbly wobbly. You're relying on that bed being absolutely true to this ram face, which you can't guarantee it, and I wouldn't trust it, because if you just continue to push, the bottom of that ram is going to want to push the top of that liner square to itself, and if it's not true to the bore, it's just going to get to a point and maybe crack the block. Something's got to give. So by using the 2 bars here, in theory, that liner is going to just press in. It's just going to follow the existing bore, and it's going to be able to rock in the X and the Y on those bars. So that's my theory, and it seems to have worked up until now. So far, we're at about just over a ton. See, it's going up now, look. Now that gives a good indication that the interference is perfect on this. And that is about as tight as you want that. The reason it started to jump at the end isn't because of the interference, it's because the glue's gone, and while I'm recording it started to go off and it's just snatching on the glue. So that, guys, I'm more than happy with. That is down as far as you go. We're up probably about 5 or 6 ton there. So yeah, perfect. Over the moon with that. Now what we're going to do is get this one set up on the boring bar, get it bored, faced, and give it to Paul to clean up. Fantastic news. Right, so we've turned the block over now. As you can see, it's lovely and clean inside there, and we've got the uprated main bearings in here. We're using King race bearings on the mains, and we're using a Marla Motorsport on the big end. So we've got those bearings in. As you can see, they're oiled up, so we just put a drop of oil in there and literally wipe your finger in and just make sure the bearings are coated. You don't need to plaster loads of oil in there. I don't want to run the risk of oil going behind the bearings, in between the block and the bearing, and closing that clearance up. Secondly, we've got our standard thrust washers either side there. on the bottom half. Now, for Christ's sake, make sure if you're building one of these, you get these thrusts the right way round. You've got the steel backing, and then you've got the copper front there. It's always the side with the grooves that go towards the crank. If you get those the wrong way round, guys, that is going to scrap the crank. So get those in the right way round. You wouldn't believe the amount of times that John and I have took sumps off in the past just to check them, because we're paranoid about them, because it can cause catastrophe. So next step, let's get the crankshaft in the block. So just before we put it in, we've got to put the rear main seal on. Now, we've got two seals here. We've got the rubber one, conventional rubber one that comes in the kit, the bottom end set, and then we've got a PTFE one here. Now, I like to use a PTFE seal. The difference between them both is that you have to grease the inner lip of this. Both of them have dry externals, making sure that the housing is bone dry. But you grease the inside of the rubber lip, whereas the PTFE you put on dry. So you've got to make sure that the crankshaft is dry where it goes. Now, I prefer to run the PTFE, providing that there is no big groove in the crank, because over time, over the years, where the seal runs round and round and round on this diameter here, it can cause a groove. If there's a groove in there, I tend to run the rubber one and sort of just place the rubber one offset slightly so it runs on the outside of the groove. But in this case, the crank is perfect. We're going to use the PTFE seal. So what we do with the PTFE, you've got to be very, very careful, because it's not as flexible as rubber. If you push it in, it tends to stay there. So that's why it comes with this sleeve on the inside. You can see the sleeve is tapered up. So what we do, that fits nicely on the end of that crank. Then what you do is you just wiggle it till it just goes onto the crank. Then you can take the sleeve off and throw that away. So what we do is we just position it to where it's got to go onto the crankshaft, and then we lower that crank in with the seal on the back. So you can see the crank's in now. Next thing, you see that seal, it's got to sit right back against that shoulder. So what we do is we just push that seal evenly all the way around, and also underneath, making sure that that is fully back. There we go. You see now that is located correctly. So the next thing is we want to get the main bearing caps on. So we've got the bottom halves of our bearings somewhere. Here they are. There they go. So we're going to put those in the caps. The caps are all cleaned up, washed, ready to go. So we'll put these in, get our thrusts into the cap. Now you see the thrusts that go in the cap have got a locator. Now the reason the bottom ones haven't and these ones have is they just locate into the cap. It stops them all from spinning. If you just put plain ones without the locator in the top, you run the risk of them spinning round, and that could mark with the steel backing. What that would do is work its way into the cap and the block, giving you extra end float and scrapping the block as well. So they are very, very, very important, those little tags. You've got to make sure they go in where necessary. So before the mains go on, you see we've got two dowels here. We've got two long dowels, and there's two that are about half the height of that on these engines. Now the long ones go in the rear main, and the shorter ones go in the centre. The idea of these dowels is to, obviously you have one in the centre which has got the thrust, just to make sure that cap is absolutely central, so you know that the thrusts are going to be in line with the bottom halves, and you've got it on the end to make sure the cap doesn't move at all, just so it ensures that seal doesn't move. So it is important that you put those in, guys. I've done it before where I've put the engine together, put the sump on, and then realised I've got a couple left over, so I've had to take it to bits again. So when we put a cap on, we've obviously got the thrusts in. You can see the thrusts are the correct way because the bronze is on the outside. What we do is we lay it on top. We just do the bolts up very slightly, rubber mallet, and just very, very gently tap that into its home position. Very, very gently. Don't want to start hitting it with the solid end, I'll tell you that for nothing. And then we just wind these down. Okay. And then we'll get the other ones on. Right, so the next step is to check the end float. So what we do is put the DTI gauge on the block, and just on the end of the crank here, and you can see I've zeroed it. And what we want to do is move the crankshaft backwards and forwards, and and just see what we got. We want to be aiming between 3 and 8 thou really, but I always go for the sort of lower end. So he's up against the 0 there. If we move crank the other way, you can see that that's 0.1 of a mil, which is 4 thou. So that is absolutely perfect. As you can see, he's all torqued up, 75 foot-pounds, and that crank turns absolutely lovely. We've got 2 thou of running clearance on that crank, so I'm happy with that. So guys, Monday afternoon now, and I've been a busy bee today. The Cosworth here, so this is Lee Workman's. This was the one that we were waiting for the liner that I put in last week, the special liner, which has gone in number 2. And that is all pretty much done now on the bottom end wise anyway. We've obviously balanced the crank assembly, did me dummy build this morning, took off the tops of the pistons, the correct amount, so we've now got 12 thou jut out on those pistons. You see we've got the 6 long studs and the 4 normal ones on the outside. I've got the crank in, torqued up, new core plugs, got my front pulleys on and the cam belt. So the next step on this one, apart from waiting for a new oil pump, got all the pickup cleaned up. I haven't got to do any painting on this because Lee brought it in looking absolutely fantastic. So to look at, you wouldn't have thought there's anything wrong with this. It looked bloody lovely, but not so great inside. So all I'm doing now, we've cleaned up the cylinder head and I'm just cutting the valve seats. As you can see, we've got new guides in there on all of them. Just got to remount the exhaust slightly and then cut those seats, skim the head, and that can be all put back together, which hopefully by the time the oil pump turns up in the morning, it will all be ready to be put back on. So as soon as I get that head done, can plonk that on with a new head gasket. Always use a Victor Rines multi-layer. We've got the G19 sump baffle in here. That's worth its weight in gold, that thing, especially on the big wing sumps there. Good morning guys, and welcome back to another episode of Barum Engines. So today, first thing we're going to do is crack on with Lee's Cosworth engine. Let's get it finished. So you can see the bottom end is almost there. Guys, like I said on the last video, just waiting for the oil pump to turn up from Burton, and then we can get that on. So this is the cylinder head. We've cut all the seats now. Now these seats particularly, just the inlets at the moment we've done. Obviously put new guides in, reamed them. These seats were not brilliant, so we've had to cut these down, probably worst, about 7 thou, something like that, and that was this one here. So what I normally do with the Cosworths, because you haven't got much to play with on the back of the hydraulic, there isn't a great deal of give in the hydraulic lifter. I mean, the idea of the lifter is to take up any sort of clearance there, but you can get to a point if you face the valve seats back too far, you can bottom out the hydraulic, and what that'll do is open the valve and then you get a misfire. So what I always do on this, as I say, the worst one is about 7 thou, at best are about 3 thou. When I put them in, usually they sit flush with the cylinder head. So I measure the depth of them, and whatever the depth is, I'll take off the back of the stem. So as I say, at worst they're 7, at best they're about 3 thou. So what I normally do is measure the depth from the cylinder head down to the valve. So what I normally do is measure from the face to the end of the valve. We zero that, then we come over to this machine. So first of all, this is obviously having faced the 45-degree angle on the face. So we do that first, then we measure the head, from the head to the top of the valve, and then we take off here. So that'll be 0. I'm not going to do this one because I've already done it, but what we do is we put it in this end here. We just nip that up, wind that back to the stop, and then we push that valve onto the stone so it touches the stone, nip it up here, and then we just go backwards and forwards on that stone, winding this in gradually, doing it a bit at a time, and then we sort of measure it, and when it's down, say for instance it's 3 thou lower than the head face, we just take 3 thou off here, and then we know we're going to be back to normal on the hydraulic side. So I've done all them. Now what I'm going to do is turn the head around, ream the exhaust guides and do the same on that. Cut them, measure the valves and see if we have to take any off the stem on the backside. Right, so quickly before I get in amongst the exhausts, all the inlets are done now, and as you can see the way we test those is we've got a vacuum tester here. So what this does is it's a tube here with various size pads that we put over the port, so you use a big enough pad to go over the port, obviously with the valves in. We turn this on and what it does is draw the air out of here. So if I put my thumb over there, you see that goes right through to the green, and what we're looking for is something that without the springs and without having to push the valves down, it goes up past the 400, ideally into the green. So if I put that pad on there, you see that going up to the green as it sucks the air out. If it doesn't go up there, what that means is it's sucking air past the valves and it's not sealing correct. You see all these now, no force on there, no springs, going right up to the green. Problem I had with this head, when we stripped it, what I normally do is cut the seats, then plonk the valves in and see what we had before, see whether the valves are right. Now, this cylinder had no vacuum at all, so I thought, well, it must be a bit of dirt on the seat. So I've cleaned them all off. Obviously, I've cut them, and this was a valve that was in it. You see, I haven't faced it yet. If I put this old valve in here, press that down, put the sucker on it, nothing happens at all. If I press the valve, you can hear it trying to. So what I did then was put this valve into the valve head refacer, like so. Turn it on, and you can see that head wobbling about, so it's got a bent valve in it. So what you find is when it's a very slightly bent valve, with the spring on, and the spring, if the guides are worn and the spring is pulling the head into the seat, it may well have had probably compression, not as obviously nothing like it should have. So we've got a new valve here, all faced up. Pop that in, vacuum tester on, and you see that goes straight into the green. So yeah, that's what you find, guys. If it's a very slightly bent valve, so if it's been over revved at some point and it's just contacted with the piston, that's why I always put my big valve cutouts in there, so that doesn't happen. The spring will pull the valve into the seat, so you do get compression, but eventually that valve being sort of bent back into shape every time, it could fatigue, drop the head off the valve and blow the engine up. So it's a good job we went through this head. Right, so here's the Cosworth now, got all the valve seats done, all the valves laid out. We're just giving it a very light lick over, see if it cleans or not. But while that's doing, guys, we've just had the delivery from Burton Power. So what we've got in here, we've got a genuine Ford oil filter. They're the only ones I use on the Cosworths, which is ideal. This is all for Lee's engine that we're doing. The oil pump. This is a two-wheel drive oil pump. So these are slightly, these are sort of getting on half the price of the four-wheel drives, and the four-wheel drives are a bit hard to come by at the moment. But I know that these ones from Burton are good. You've got to be a bit careful on some of these pumps, the aftermarket ones, on the quality. But what I always do, even if it's a brand new pump, take the top off, make sure there's no flashing or anything from the casting inside, and just make sure everything turns right, and then put it all back together and prime it all up. So at least we've got the pump now, we can get all that on. So I've ordered a few other bits. Obviously we've got the gaskets for Lee's engine here, but I've ordered a few other bits from Burton just to put in my stock. So here we've got the balls that go in the back of the block in the main oil gallery. So that is that ball down there, you see that? There we go. So they just go in the back of the main oil gallery. Now at the front of the oil gallery, there's two core plugs. There's a large and a small. I keep them in stock as well. Also, these are the oil gallery plugs that go in either side of the head. So there's 4 of these in a head, 2 at the back, 2 at the front. And these are a BSPT an 8th BSPT plug, so they're a slightly tapered plug, and we normally put those in with a bit of this Haldite. I've told you before, the Haldite is the joining compound that goes hard, and it's great against sort of sealing oil. So stick those in our little spares drawers. These are my drawers for the Cosworth stuff, so I've got a load of spare gaskets and seals, etc. in there, loads of bits. These are the core plugs that go in the other end of the block, so these go behind the jack shaft. You've got the small ones down there, the big ones there. Obviously we've got some spare oil pump bolts that bolt the pump to the block. Some circlips there, spare, that come off the valve guides. I've told you we need to take the circlips off the old guys and put on the new ones. We shall pop those in there. So that's some of our spares. We've got spare head bolts there. So obviously, when I do the long studs, if I do 6 long studs, we need 4 head bolts on the outside. So I normally, if I buy a pack, I put the spares in there, then I can just use them. Saves me buying another set. Here we've got some spare auxiliary shaft retaining tapered screws. So these are the ones that well, I can't show you now because it's behind there, but there's the jack shaft that goes in there. There's like a fork that holds it in. Now these are the bolts that bolt it to the block, so I'll just keep some of them spare just in case we ended up, because usually they're a Phillips screwdriver and the head gets all a bit mullered, so these obviously are a hex, so we just replace them if need be. We'll stick them in there as well. And then here we've got some more bolts. I always, don't matter what they're like, because of the weird little female spline drive in there, I always change these. I put 2 new ones in for the oil pump, so we'll stick them in there as well. Spare core plug sets, obviously core plugs for the engine. On the 200 blocks we only need 2 of them, and it comes with an extra 1 and 1 for the back, so I normally just accumulate another set. And then finally, guys, we've got some of the hex drives for the oil pumps, so I always stick a new one of those in, no matter what the old one's like. And that is it, and they sent us a new catalogue by the looks of it. So yeah, the next step, guys, we'll get that oil pump onto the pickup, prime it all up, sort it all out, and get that on the block, get the sump on. So we've done the first cut, guys. I literally only give it about a 3/1000 cut, but you can see around this area here, which is number 3, you can see there where the gasket has been sort of wearing into the head, especially around this area here, it was starting to blow a head gasket. So I'll give this another 3/1000 cut. Same here, look, not great. These water jackets got a little bit of corrosion around the edge, but they're nowhere near the gasket line, so we don't need to do any welding there. The rest of the head looks pretty good, to be honest, so let's see what it cleans like with this 3/1000. Right, so you can see we've got the oil pump apart now, guys. This is the new one, so what we're looking for is obviously just make sure, just visibly, I know it's new, but we just visibly have a look at all this, make sure there's no flash in there. On here, we just make sure all that's good. We want to inspect the top there. Now, basically what I've done is I've turned it around. I've stuck the Allen key in, which is the drive for it. I've put that in the bottom when it's all assembled, turn it all around. I just want to make sure on here that we've got no sort of scoring or anything. Now in here you want to be careful of the bottom, because it's all been machined. You want to make sure there's no flashing in here that's going to jam the thing up, or make sure that there's no scoring on the bottom of here where it's been rubbing against any flashing. So it all looks pretty good. We stick that in. We've got a dot which goes upwards, and the same on there, look. So we'll pop all this back together now. Now this is a high pressure pump, and all that means on these Cosworths, high pressure is in the back there where that core plug is. Behind there is a ball and a spring. All it is a stronger spring really, and just holds a bit better oil pressure. If we can, I always buy the high pressure pumps with the stronger spring, and all that is because we run a different oil to what they run originally, especially on the tune stuff. It just holds that bit oil pressure, that bit more oil pressure when the oil's hot. So what we'll do is we'll put all this together, we'll tighten it all up, and then we put the drive in the back, and you can see down the hole there where it's all turning. Make sure it's all turning nicely. okay, before we put any oil in there. And then what we're going to do now, that's all seems really good. So we're going to put the oil pickup pipe on there with the new gasket, put it on the engine, and we'll prime it before we put the sump on. So we'll put a load of oil down there and we'll turn the pump and get it all primed up. Right, so we've got the pickup and the oil pump on the block now. Now, I've said to you in a previous video when I'm doing these, there's 3 things to look out for when you get these on. Now, the first thing that's very important, because these pumps have a crap design where there's 2 bolts at the back, not even central to hold the pump flat onto the block. And obviously these things don't run a gasket, so they're relying on the pump sitting dead flat on the block, otherwise you can lose oil pressure. So if you look down, you can see the daylight there. Well, that bit there is slightly raised from the platform of the oil pump, so you're expecting to see a bit of daylight there, but there and round here you don't want to see any daylight. So I'm convinced that that's flat. What I normally do is put you've got a 8mm bolt here that holds the pickup down. I normally do that bolt down, not all the way, and certainly don't do it tight until you do these. Obviously a bit of thread lock on all 3 so they don't shake loose. The same on these bolts here for the pickup. We've got the oil pump gasket. So first of all, we want to make sure that's flat. Secondly, we want to make sure that the pump is not skew-if. Now there is a dowel in there that's in between the block and the pump to make sure it's central, but you just want to make sure there's a gap there. On the 4-wheel drives, it runs a lot closer than that. 2-wheel drives, you're normally all right. And then thirdly, running the ARP 2000 bolts, which are taller than the standard. You want to bring the crank round to the bolts just below the pickup pipe and make sure you've got a good mil or 2 mil of gap there. On the 4-wheel drives, they tend to sit a bit closer, so what I have to do is put a little indent in the pipe there and just make sure you've got clearance. So they're the only things to look out for, guys. Now what we're going to do is just get the sump on there. So next stage of the Cosworth, you can see we've got the tensioner on there, albeit loosely. We found TDC, so we've got our DTI gauge in the spark plug hole, and we've found true TDC and set it with our marker, so we're right on TDC there. We've got the camshafts in, inlet and exhaust. You can see we haven't put the bearings in or the pulleys on yet. There's a reason for that, I'll show you in a second. Auxiliary shaft, when the crankshaft is on TDC, the auxiliary shaft times up with that arrow in the centre of that half moon at the back there. And you can see that belt lines up nicely there. So obviously I've stripped these cams down. What I'm going to do is clean the bearings up. The bearings feel really good, so I'm just going to clean them up and oil them up. Obviously new O-ring on there. But one thing I did find when I took these pulleys off, and that's that the cam seals are meant to be flush with that housing. You can see they popped out, so they've been running like that, especially this one. This one is what they call on the piss, and if I take that out, you can see in that housing where that seal has been sitting. You see it there? See where that seal has been sitting on the piss. So it's probably been held in by the front pulley, but if that wasn't leaking, then it soon would have been absolutely hosing out oil. So we're going to get new seals in there, clean all this up, put it back together, and then obviously because we've got the vernier pulleys, we're going to be setting those verniers up the same way as we normally do, and then all we've got to do then is stick the rocker on and we're all done. So there we go, guys. The Cosworth is now all finished, all timed up on the verniers, etc. Rocker cover on. We've got loads of cam lube under there on the cams, so that is all ready for Lee to pick up on the Saturday. So it's been quite a long time since I've done a sort of value video, especially on these Cosworths. So seeing as we're doing quite a lot of Cosworths and seeing this video is about a Cosworth engine that we're building, what we're going to do, guys, I'm going to run through a bill here where it's actually an estimate that I send to a customer. It's with the Cosworths, it's fairly generic, this estimate. So the way I do it, like I've said to you before, I can't remember now, I haven't watched the video for a while, but I can't remember how much our hourly rate was and all that back then. But our hourly rate has gone up slightly in the last year to £70 an hour. And a few of our machining processes have changed price. They're still way cheaper than some other people's mind, by the sounds of it, but this is basically how I estimate it. So what I estimate it for a Cosworth, it's the same for any 4-cylinder. I normally estimate about 30 hours of labour, so that will entail getting the engine in as a tall motor, bare of any ancillaries on the outside. So it consists of stripping it, obviously inspecting everything, measuring it, sort of reporting back to the customer on what we find, blasting the engine, cleaning it all, painting it all, any dummy builds, obviously a complete build of the engine, any sort of checking of like valve to piston clearance and all that bespoke stuff. So we normally estimate for a 4-cylinder about 30 hours. Now what I normally say is, unless we've had a chat with the customer and he specifies he wants something a bit extra to that, then it could be about 35 hours. That's a worst case. So say 30 hours in general on a 4-cylinder. What we normally say is if it takes us less, we'll charge less. We mark the hours as we go along. It's as simple as that. We can't be any more fair than that. But if it goes to 30 hours, which a lot of the time they do, it's surprising how much cleaning etc it takes on these engines. So that's about 2,100 quid. All these prices are plus VAT, mind. So then that's what we normally estimate at the top. Then underneath that we put the machining processes and the balancing. So we've got overhaul the cylinder head on a 16 valve, so something like a Cosworth, it's £185. So what you get for that is obviously reface the head, blast the head, decoke it, cut the valve seats. Extra to that, you will have things like fitting valve guides. If it's 16 valve guides, we charge an hour, 70 quid to do that, or £5 each, I think it is, which is 80 quid. So that'll be extra if it needs guys. A lot of the time on the Cosworths they need exhaust guides at the very least, so that'd be another 40 quid to fit exhaust guides plus the cost of the guide. Then you've got reface the block. You've got, on this one, we've got fit liners. So on the Cosworths, when we do the ductile iron liners, we charge £130 per liner to fit the liners, and there's 4 of those obviously. Regrind the crank, £17.50 a journal, and there's 9 journals. If the crank measures perfect, we polish it, it's £3.50 a journal. So you've got then size and balance the com rod. So when I do them a bit on where we torque up the rods after cleaning them, we size them, and then we balance them afterwards. We charge £25 to do all of that. If it's just balancing, £15 a rod. If we have to size it, it's £25 a rod, so 100 quid there. Machine the valve cutouts, I charge an hour's labour, 70 quid to do that. Machine the block for long studs. A lot of the time it's the 6 studs, that's £150. If it's 10 studs, it's £250, because you've got extra processes in the outside for. You've got to go down with the end mill, etc. So it's probably as long to do those 4 as it is to do the centre 6. Dynamically balance the crank assembly, so that is from the front pulley, the crank, all the way back to the clutch cover. That's £135. Then we've got, that's the machining processes. So let's just quickly work that out, what it's cost so far. So that's about 1,300 quid's worth of machining and balancing. That's assuming that we've got to put the ductile iron liners in there, okay? If you haven't, then you can take 500 odd quid off that. And then you've got your bits, guys. Bits are varying. It depends who's got what. We use different suppliers for different things. Obviously, for the Cosworths, we know how much the bits are. You've got a set of pistons at about £140. Then you've got your ductile iron liners, which are £110 each, again, £440. Hydraulic lifters, you're looking at about £200 for a genuine set of twin chambered hydraulic lifters, because there's 16 of them. Long stud kit, £300 for a long stud kit. Cam belt kit, 60 quid. WRC head gasket, £100. That's the Victor Rhines ones that we always use. Headset, 37 quid. Bottom end set, 37.50. Rear crank seal, if I like to use the PTFE seal, which is 17 quid. Oil pump, depending, 120 quid for a 2-wheel drive, a couple of £100 for a 4-wheel drive. Struggling to get them at the minute. And then there's your valve guides, about 40 quid for exhaust, 40 quid for inlets. Mains and big ends. Now I tend to use the King race bearings, which come in a lot cheaper than the Marla Motorsport bearings. Marla Motorsport are about 210 per set, but the King race come in at about 130 quid for the set. And then you've got your carriage of all the bits, which I normally put at the end, 40 quid on all this. So yeah, this quote here, guys, bear in mind there's long studs, ductile iron liners, built it all up, bespoke build, fully balanced, and that's £5,336 plus the VAT, so 6,400 quid. As I say, not all of them need the liners, not all of them need the long studs, but bear in mind that is a fully blueprinted motor besides that, so even if you took that out of it, you know, it's £4,500 quid plus the VAT. So that's how much it costs to do a Cosworth these days, guys.
Okay, all done. And after a nightmare trip up the M5 in the rain, the engine's finally back in the man cave, and it's time to put it on the engine stand and refit all the ancillaries. So I'm going to cut the video here. We'll get it back on the engine stand. I can refit a new thrust bearing, put the light and flywheel on and the clutch, put the inlet and the exhaust and the turbo on, and we'll cover all that good stuff. Until next time, thanks very much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.